Cristiano Ronaldo called out Manchester United's problems before anyone else dared to.
I don't know what's going on, but since the Sir Alex Ferguson left, I saw not evolution in the club. The progress was zero. For example, you have an interesting point that how the club as Manchester United, after suck, they bring sport directive Ralph Rangnick, which is something that nobody understands. This guy is not even a coach.
He talked about outdated facilities, a lack of ambition, and leadership failure. And the world laughed at him. Media, pundits, even former teammates dismissed his words as ego and arrogance.
If you felt the need to write some piffling words, do it when he leaves. There is no need to gratify anybody, right? He's gone. He made a pig's ear of it in the end. He was a nuisance. He was a problem. He was not the same player he was. He should never have gone back to that club, right? He should never have given the interview, and he got what he deserved. Why Manchester United, a club as big as them, feel the need to pamper to somebody?
But just a year later, the exact issues he warned about were exposed for everyone to see. In this story, we'll break down how football's biggest superstar turned into Manchester United's most inconvenient prophet. Ronaldo's homecoming was supposed to reignite Manchester United.
Madeira, Manchester, Madrid, Turin, and Manchester again. Wreathed in red, restored to this great gallery of the game, a walking work of art. Vintage, beyond valuation, beyond forgery or imitation. 18 years since that trembling teenager first tiptoed onto this storied stage, now in his immaculate maturity, CR7.
But why did the dream so quickly turn sour? For millions of fans, this was more than just a transfer. It was a story returning full circle. The boy who had left Old Trafford in 2009 as the most expensive player in the world was coming back 12 years later as a global icon, carrying the hope of a club that hadn't touched the heights it once owned. His first spell had left behind Premier League titles, a Champions League triumph, and the Ballon d'Or. That legacy made September 2001 feel like destiny, like Manchester United's greatest days could rise again. The announcement of his return echoed far beyond Manchester. In a matter of hours, the club shattered merchandise records, his shirt flying off the shelves across continents. Social media lit up with tributes, photos, endless montages of his earlier glory. Headlines described it as the deal to lift United back among Europe's elite. Old Trafford's atmosphere against Newcastle, when Ronaldo scored twice on his second debut, became an instant reference point for fans who believed they were witnessing the rebirth of Manchester United.
Before that, everything changed. The world speak about me, Cristiano, back home, back where they belong. So it was a special moment to be back to Manchester United, to perform for our fans, and of course to score 2 goals was the best welcome that I received.
In that moment, the club appeared unstoppable again. But the problems that had defined the post-Ferguson years, they hadn't disappeared. Since 2013, Manchester United had gone through a carousel of managers, each tasked with restoring dominance, none able to deliver the consistency of old. The drop-off compared to the dominance under Ferguson, it was visible in the league table, in the trophy count, and in the performance against rivals who were building stronger, faster, more modern teams. The gap between the nostalgia of Ronaldo's return and the reality of a club still struggling was wider than it looked in those first few weeks.
It surprised me a lot. I thought I will see different things, as I mentioned before, technology, infrastructure, but unfortunately we see many things that I'm used to see when I was 20, 21, 23, so surprised me a lot.
Still, supporters clung to the fairy tale. They wanted to believe that his presence alone would lift up teammates, tighten defending, and inspire discipline. For a while, the narrative held up. Ronaldo kept scoring, often at crucial moments in European matches, and those goals provided a lot of illusion that the plan was working. But beneath the surface, the team still looked fractured. defenders struggled, the midfield lacked balance, and tactical chaos grew harder to ignore. By the winter of 2021, small cracks were hard to hide. Matches began slipping away. There were games where Ronaldo's goals bailed out poor performances, but without cohesion, the problems multiplied. The early excitement gave way to conversations about pressing systems, player effort, and the lack of direction from above. The dream that began with shirts flying off the shelves was fading under the weight of old issues that had never been solved.
Since the Sir Alex Ferguson left, I saw not evolution in the club. The progress was zero.
Tensions reached a point when Ronaldo's frustration became visible. He didn't just turn up to score goals, he expected standards, professionalism, and structure. But what he saw did not match what fans had imagined. His words no longer sounded like celebration, they sounded like warnings. And before the world realized what those warnings meant, his honesty was treated as arrogance. What did Ronaldo actually say that caused such outrage? In his explosive interview, he accused Manchester United of standing still. He said nothing has changed, describing how the gym, pool, and even the catering at Carrington were the same as they'd been over a decade earlier.
Nothing changed. Surprisingly, not only the pool, the jacuzzi, even the gym. Even some points, the technology, the kitchen.
This wasn't just about nostalgia, it was a direct charge that one of the world's richest clubs had failed to move forward. He went further, saying the club needed to be torn down and rebuilt, pointing his criticism firmly at the hierarchy and their lack of vision. For a fan base that had spent years divided over the Glazers, his words landed like a bomb.
To reach successful like other teams, like for example Liverpool, Manchester City, Chelsea, they are one step behind or two because of this kind of mistakes, in my opinion. They should improve and change probably the staff or the people, the directives or presidents.
The pushback was immediate. Former teammates who once shared the pitch with him quickly turned critics. Wayne Rooney's comments were especially harsh, mocking Ronaldo as if his time had already passed.
He feels that Ronaldo needs to accept he's in the latter stages of his career, and being a player at the club the size of Manchester United means respecting the situation and not expecting to play every minute of every game. We at Sky Sports News have been told Rooney feels no animosity towards Ronaldo.
Gary Neville also piled on, only for Ronaldo to bite back that they don't really know what's going on inside Carrington, suggesting that they had no idea of the reality hidden from view. In the media, the story was framed as a fading superstar raging against the dying light. Supporters felt betrayed. For many, these interviews didn't sound like leadership. They sounded like self-preservation. Yet, the symbolism of what he pointed to was impossible to ignore. Carrington had once been state-of-the-art, but rivals like Manchester City and Tottenham had built advanced complexes that included recovery suites, sports science labs, and technology-driven analysis hubs. Ronaldo's description of outdated facilities was less about personal comfort and more about falling behind. But that distinction was lost in the noise of pundits, portraying him as a disruptive distraction. The conflict deepened as Ronaldo's demands for higher standards mirrored warnings that had been ignored years earlier by Jose Mourinho. Mourinho had clashed with the board when he complained about an absence of ambition, and at the time, he was branded toxic. Now, Ronaldo was walking the same path and facing the same reaction. Fans, desperate for unity after years of chaos, painted him as selfish rather than seeing the pattern. They laughed at him. The breaking point arrived in October 2022 during a home game against Tottenham. Ordered to come on as a late substitute, Ronaldo refused. The fallout was swift. Ten Hag dropped him from the squad, forced him to train apart from the group, and even barred him from using the first-team dressing room. The humiliation became clear when he had to send a youth player to fetch his boots, a symbolic exile for a man once treated like a king in that very building. The club framed it as discipline, but Ronaldo, he saw it as betrayal.
The club.
At the senior executive level?
Yes, that I felt betrayed.
What emerged now was a larger picture. His words were not simply about his role, they spoke to a system that refused to look in the mirror. Instead of confronting these uncomfortable truths, Manchester United closed ranks against the one man bold enough to say them aloud. And then came the twist. United's decline proved his warnings were prophetic. What happens when the so-called arrogant player's warnings become reality? For Manchester United, that answer unfolded almost immediately after Cristiano Ronaldo's exit.
If he's sitting on the bench for Man United week in, week out, it's not good. It's just going to get ugly. And I think United have shown nothing but disrespect to Ronaldo.
The team's results dipped, league points positions slipped, and Champions League qualification was suddenly out of reach. What had sounded exaggerated when he said it now looked obvious, as the cracks became impossible to paper over. United's struggles weren't small stumbles, they were structural.
I have to say, I think what's happened over the last 10 years that the club is coming home to roost right now at this moment in time.
The side lacked rhythm from game to game, and inconsistency haunted the squad. Without Ronaldo's match-winning goals to cover deeper flaws, problems came into full view. The club's league finishes reflected this, with Champions League football being lost at key moments. A blow both to finances and prestige. Missing out meant fewer commercial opportunities and made elite talent harder to attract. For a club built on global dominance, this stung as more than just a sporting failure.
A similar start. He broke his record from last season, which was United's last worst start to a season, and somehow he's managed to break it back-to-back in the next season. Manchester United finishing 8th last season, worst ever finish, worst ever start this season. He looks like the same.
Defensively, the numbers told the story. Conceding at a higher rate than their direct rivals, United regularly looked exposed at the back. Attacking threat was unstable too. Trophy challenges would rise and collapse in the same season.
It's men v boys, but United are so off it, it's unbelievable.
This volatility wasn't the mark of a club positioned to compete at the top, it was proof of exactly what Ronaldo had said. The structure behind the team wasn't strong enough to sustain success. Inside the club, the tone was no better. Fan protests made headlines outside Old Trafford, while boardroom debates about ownership dragged on with little resolution. Dressing room stories painted a picture of instability rather than unity. Managers came and went, each with promises of plans and strategies, yet those visions struggled to last long enough to build anything. It created a cycle of short-term fixes framed as long-term projects, a carousel Ronaldo had warned of when he said there was no clear leadership. On screen, the contrast becomes even clearer when Ronaldo's lines about outdated facilities are matched beside images of Carrington before any renovation. The difference grows sharper when we arrive at the Ratcliffe-led investment plan, £236 million earmarked for a new first-team complex to modernise what Ronaldo had called outdated years earlier. His teammate, Diogo Dalot, even admitted, "I'm sure he'd love it if he'd be able to see it," underlying just how overdue those changes were. What once sounded like bitterness was now the blueprint being followed. Perhaps the most revealing shift came from media voices themselves. Pundits who had dismissed Ronaldo as selfish, now admitting his concerns had merit. The same figures who painted his words as ego were re-evaluating them as a warning shot ignored. This marked the turning point. His vindication, it wasn't through fresh interviews or new statements, but through the sight of United itself sliding downward.
Ronaldo, speaking to Rio Ferdinand, said, "Manchester United, they need to rebuild everything in my opinion. The coach, they say they cannot compete to win the league."
The question hanging was no longer about Ronaldo's attitude, it was about whether Manchester United's problems were ever about a single player, or if they were the product of denial from a board reluctant to confront reality. Which brings us to the enduring lesson of this saga. Ronaldo wasn't just protecting his name, he was pointing out cracks that no superstar could hide. United's problems ran deeper than one player or manager, and his frustration revealed how broken the foundations had become. Quick fixes and short-term hype had replaced long-term planning, leaving the club trapped in the same cycle of decline. The real question is simple: how many clubs will ignore voices like his until it's too late? Manchester United must build stability through structure, not stars. Sometimes, the most inconvenient voices, they're also the ones pointing towards survival, whether people want to hear them or not.